Let's go to the White House now for more on this. Jeff Mason is the White House correspondent for Reuters, and you were actually in on that meeting. You know, the whole time I was like, man, to be a fly on the wall, to just feel the mood in there. You were the fly. So what was your observation of the whole thing?
Well, number one, it was long. It was about an hour and 45 minutes. I know some of what was played, or some of the comments have already been played, but that was just the Q&A with reporters at the end. I think the president, after several days of not having a chance to really talk about the issues that he's been thinking about in the residence of the White House over the holidays, was just ready to let go, and that's what he did. And he talked about everything from his desire to have a border wall to his desire to pull troops out of Syria, to many other topics. But certainly I think overall it showed that he is doubling down on the wall. He indicated a little bit of openness to hear what the Democrats bring to that meeting at 3 o'clock. But again, the fact that they're meeting in the Situation Room, they'll have the Border Patrol and ICE brief the Democrats and the Republicans, President Trump said, and that will be a sales job, essentially, for his desire to have a wall.
Yeah, I mean, given that Democrats, though, have already stated intentions to pass bills once they take over the House tomorrow to reopen the government without including funding for the wall, I guess the question is, how are negotiations going to change now that the president is just one day away from getting his first taste of divided government when Democrats take control of the House?
And that's a terrific question, and he seemed to be sort of trying to show a willingness to be open. He said at the very beginning of the cabinet meeting that he thought that he could work with Democrats in 2019 and get a lot done. But then he also said that the government shutdown could last a long time and that he would keep it shut as long as it takes, because this issue for him of border security was critical, and it's one that he ran on in 2016 and one that he has talked about repeatedly since coming to the White House. So you're right. It's hard to see how they will come up with a compromise and which side really has an incentive to move.
Yeah, the last time that we actually saw the president sit down with Democratic lawmakers, as we know, it kind of turned into a contentious battle on television, and it didn't seem to go very well. Tomorrow, though, the House Democrats have a lot of plans. They're going to make new rules, and they plan on using their majority to vote through measures that would essentially reopen nearly all of the closed federal agencies. There we have Nancy Pelosi entering right now on Capitol Hill, and she is planning to be among the group that's going to sit down with the president today trying to hammer out a deal. Now, she has not been obviously elected speaker, but she is poised to be taking that position. Do you believe that no matter what the president says to Nancy Pelosi, if it has the word wall, slate, fence, you name it, it's not going anywhere, because until Pelosi gets that House speakership role, she's not going to be willing to budge?
Well, and I think even when she does get that House speakership title tomorrow, it seems unlikely that she would be willing to budge then, too. I mean, I think Speaker-designate Pelosi will come to this meeting feeling like she has a lot of strength. She has the backing of the Democrats, and she will have the majority in the House starting tomorrow, and that, you know, their opposition to the wall is just as central to the Democrats' message and the Democrats' thinking as support for the wall is to President Trump and many Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats will also propose the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees border security, to keep its current level of funding. So they're not touching the funding, they're not taking away, but they're not adding to it. That basically means no more money for a border wall. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said that he's not going to send something to the president. He knows he simply just is not going to sign. So then the question is, where does this standoff end?
That's exactly right. That is the question, and we tried to get sort of a sense of the president's thinking on that today. And again, he indicated the government shutdown could continue for some time. He also said that it doesn't have to go for a long time. It could be quite quick. But for that to happen, one side is going to have to step back.
All right, Jeff Mason, thank you very much. We're watching law officials there arriving at the White House as they go in to sit down. No cell phones allowed in a meeting with the president, and see if they can hammer something out before they take control of the House tomorrow. Jeff Mason, thank you very much for coming on. Always wanted a fly on the wall on this show, so now we've done it.
President Trump and Democratic leaders still battling it out over border security even after today's briefing in the Situation Room. The meeting comes after yet another clash at the border with migrants attempting to cross a section of fencing in California. Border agents used tear gas and pepper spray to push back against what DHS is calling, quote, a violent mob. Meanwhile, states are fighting back against Trump's immigration policies. Governor Andrew Cuomo pardoning more than 20 illegal immigrants facing deportation in New York and also taking a swipe at President Trump.
New York will move forward, not by building a wall, my friends, but by building new bridges. Let New York say that the federal government may shut itself down, but it will never extinguish the Statue of Liberty's torch. It will never erase the words of her poem.
So, Jesse,
yes,
you seem very fired up in this day back from vacation, so I'm going to start with you.
Yes.
Tomorrow, Nancy Pelosi will take over as Speaker of the House.
Okay.
And you okay?
I'm
you
right.
still right there? Okay. The House will pass a funding bill that may not include any wall funding, may include a little bit. The Senate passed something similar. If something like that were to get to President Trump's desk, should he veto it at this point?
I think he's dug in and has to veto it and has to hold firm on the wall funding at this point, or else he looks soft. And he'll never want to look soft because he's a tough guy. I think Mexico's paying for the wheel, too. I read that as well. I went to the DR. That's where I got this great tan, the Dominican Republic.
Great tan.
That's what it stands for.
Good tan.
So when we
you saved time saying DR.
That's right, but now you wasted my time explaining it. So when you go there, or you go to any foreign country, they ask you lots of very invasive personal questions. Have I been around any livestock recently? Am I carrying lots of cash? They want to know about all of my personal identity and all those forms and stuff like that.
Have you never traveled internationally?
You sound so surprised.
And then when you come back, they give you a hard time. And I look like a cupcake. Do I look like I'm a threat? No. So what the Democrats want is imagine if we had airport security on the border. Wouldn't that be nice? You check someone's ID, you look them up and down, you find out who they are. Imagine if you had no security at the airports. That's basically what the Democrats want. Imagine open borders at the airports, Marie.
That's not
you
what
had people coming in, you don't know where they're from, they're throwing rocks at TSA. I mean, that's chaos. You can't have that. That's all they want is they want a border wall.
So this is all to avoid the question about him being with livestock.
It was 2 chickens. 2.
But so Democrats don't want open borders. I will say, in this bill, this bill they pass tomorrow will likely include some border security funding. Kennedy, how does this end? Play this out for us here.
How does this end? It doesn't end.
Ever?
No, the immigration battle will go on and on and on. It's one of those bones that the pesky Washington dogs just love to chew on and ruminate over, and no one wants to bury it. And if they do, they're just going to dig it back up. It actually is one of the easier areas to find compromise because neither side is far from the middle ground, but they don't want to find it together because Democrats really don't want to give the president a win on immigration. But the president is also backed up against the wall because you've got people like Ann Coulter saying that he's going to fold.
Right.
And she's been a very vocal advocate of the president. Obviously, she wrote a book about his presidency.
Right.
But then at the same time, she's very willing to unfollow him and pull her support. And she has a lot of fans and supporters who they feel like they're caught in the middle. So I don't think that the argument ends anytime soon. All Congress gives us is a bunch of Band-Aids. And it's, we're not kids who fell down in the schoolyard with a couple of boo-boos. We have some real systemic problems here, and they're not willing to tackle it.
And we also have 800,000 federal employees now at Christmas time not getting paid. Many of them, the TSA agents who asked you about chickens, they're not getting paid even though they have to show up to work. So, Greg, how does
mostly Democrats
we're getting paid?
Well, they'll get paid retroactively. Congress usually retroactively pays people, but no paychecks to that part of the government are going out.
I heard the TSA was part of the essential workers that
maybe someone can fact check that for us.
I got a severe pat
They are essential, but they have to go and they don't get paid. So if you're essential, you show up, you just don't get a paycheck until the government reopens, is my understanding. We can check that. But Greg, how does the shutdown end? Not the immigration debate, because that's a bigger issue, as Kennedy said, that
until we actually start feeling it. Right now, it's not. It's actually people's lives go on. It's called a partial shutdown for a reason. It's not a shutdown. But I think this whole thing is it's a personal vendetta right now. It's a marital spat that calls for an objective mediator like Dr. Drew, right? Because it's over linguistics. It's a wall, it's a fence, it's a wence, whatever you want to call it. They need to get the people who know, like engineers, to come in and tell you exactly what you need here and there. Because the way letting politicians figure this out, it's never going to happen. Right. So can't Get Dr. Drew in with an engineer and to sit down and figure this all out, and you do it around the table.
It's like we elected all these politicians to solve problems, but we really just needed Dr. Drew.
You need a Dr. Drew who's better than Dr. Phil, I think.
We could maybe take either of them.
Adam Carolla used to say
doctors?
if Dr. Laura, Dr. Drew, and Dr. Phil were on a plane together, and the flight attendant asked for a doctor because there was an emergency, Dr. Drew would be the only one actually able to go back and treat a patient.
Legally able to treat patients. So Dan, I feel like you have some thoughts on Governor Cuomo. I could hear you having some thoughts over there.
Can I read your mind? He's a crooked thug. He's
well,
a no good phony.
People, I was a New Yorker growing up, and it's precisely because of people like Governor Cuomo that I'm now in Florida, where we have Ron DeSantis coming into office. Thankfully, I escaped the high taxes. You know, one thing about New York that's common to everybody these days is we're all Snake Plissken. We can't escape from New York quick enough, right? Because of the taxes and basically the hegemonic liberal rule. But on the veto question, of course President Trump should veto this. Walls work. Everybody knows walls work.
Won't he then own the shutdown more than he does now?
What I care about is he owns border security and protects our country from an endless wave of people crossing our border that's unsecured. And I find it comical when you ask liberals, they go, oh, walls don't work. You say, really, why not? They say, well, because you can climb over them with a ladder. I go, there's a ladder store at the border? That's fascinating. Did they carry the ladder? Did they bury the ladder in the desert? Like, the whole idea from a former Secret Service agent's perspective of a wall is to create an obstruction that stops people from doing something easily, not stops them permanently.
There are parts of the border where it's kind of laughable, because if you've been down there, and I went to the San Diego border,
I have.
And the wall stops, and then there are a bunch of rocks, and you just kind of walk around the rocks, and then you're Mexico, and then you drink margaritas, and you do questionable things like you would on spring break, and then you go back 5 minutes later to the U.S.
But that
side.
doesn't mean that's not an argument, though, for not building a wall where we can build a wall.
Yes, but there are parts where you can't build a wall, and there are also eminent domain issues, which make this whole thing, it could be very, very expensive, and it also doesn't cover the people who come in and overstay visas,
which is
that's where Congress has to come in. But working with these things completely independently is also a little bit of a non-starter.
I have a challenge for Nancy and Chuck. I think Nancy and Chuck should go to the border themselves and see with their own eyes what's really going on down there and where walls are needed and where they're not, because they've just been hiding up north.
We'll see if they take you up on that, Jesse.
They're watching.
I think their backs are up against the wall.